Tell me about a time where you were in the rat race of emotional clutter. What was going on in your life? What did the day-to-day look like? Like, tell me about a time you were experiencing that and how you got out of it.
Oh gosh. All right. So 2 years ago, my wife and I were taking a walk in our neighborhood as we normally do at night. And something really surprising happened this night. As we're crossing the street, there's an inordinate amount of traffic because there's like a huge, tennis event that's happening. It's a kind of small neighborhood. And there's a car that's making a left turn onto the highway entry. They turned when they weren't supposed to turn and they didn't see me. And I had no idea that they wouldn't stop. And, hey, we raised our hands so that they'd stop and we kept going. And next thing you know, I feel the impact of a car hitting my body. And when I first felt it, I'm like, this isn't happening. And of course, now they know that they've hit me. And so what I'm dealing with now is a situation where I'm going to be really angry and we're probably going to be yelling at each other. And it's going to be one of those, what are you doing moments? But it didn't stop. And they kept going. And it's an SUV sized car. And they knock me out. I am like further up on the highway entry. And my wife screams and they respond to her screaming. They heard her scream and they noticed her gesturing. And that's when the driver realized that they hit me. And I'm so thankful that it was just one lane and that the driver finally did stop. Because if they had driven over me, even if they would have missed, with the amount of cars coming onto that highway entry at that speed, I would have been done. So now, at first, there's the emotion of confusion, there's anger, there's fear, and then there's nothing. and then there's me waking up with all of my clothes having been cut off my body, and me, in the the hospital gown, and the paramedics are taking me to the emergency room. And I feel a ton of physical pain, but I'm also very confused and disoriented. And I'm wondering, where's my wife? Because she's not in there. They wouldn't let her ride in there. So she's running back to our place to get the keys to meet me at the hospital. And I've got so much going on. I'm afraid. I'm disoriented and confused. I'm very angry. Somehow in this situation, I still manage the ability to be super angry at this stupid driver. That's what I'm saying in my mind. And I've got so many questions and so many anxieties that follow from those questions. Am I all right? I feel really hurt. Is this going to change my life? Do I have to hear any news that's going to be really bad for me? Man, the depths of emotional clutter there. Fast forward to today. How did I come out on the other side? I don't really know. But what I can say is that I have this belief that no matter what it is, there's always the other side. If you're going through something really bad, there's another side to it. If you're experiencing a moment that's really good, you're in the middle of winning the Super Bowl, well, there's another side. This parade's going to be over at some point. The celebration's going to be over at some point. The euphoria is going to wear off at some point. And when you get to that other side, you're going to want to look back and feel a certain sense of pride about how you handled yourself during the moment, right? No one wants to say, man, I remember when we won the Super Bowl, I celebrated in the way that really belittled my opponents and that really failed to show appreciation for my teammates. Or, man, I went through that really hard time and I'm over it now, but I was such a brat. I was such a snob. And so when I'm in the moment going through something like that, I try to think to myself as much as I can, when I come out on the other side, I'm going to have to be that future self and I'm going to have to look back on how I'm acting right now. How do I want to feel about that? And how can I conform to that in the most authentic way possible? And that's kind of like a starting point for me.
It's amazing that you're not only alive, that you've come out of that accident with so much introspection, so much wisdom, so much depth to you, that and that you're able to share it in the way that you are right now. There's a lot of people who go through experiences like that, or maybe like less severe. Maybe they go through a breakup, maybe they get fired from their job, maybe somebody attacks them on the internet, and that throws them in this loop, right, where they're in this rut, and it's constant. And I call it the rat race because it's like every day it compounds, because they get into this rut, and every day they're feeling sorry for themselves. They're saying, woe is me, my life's not going to get better, I feel hopeless, I'm like crippled by fear, and they don't get to that other side. Like, what do you think prevents people from getting to the other side, other than, like you mentioned, the importance of wanting to look back at your actions during those times and making sure that your future self is aligned with that? Like, what else do you think keeps people stuck there?
This might sound paradoxical or contradictory because I just spoke of wanting to feel proud of how I handle something when I look back on it. But I also feel very strongly about not demanding an artificially enlightened response from myself when I go through adversity. It's easy to, if you use acting as an example, and you give a new actor a script, they often have what's called the actor voice, where they start to speak in an accent that the character doesn't even call for. And it's kind of a weird thing they're doing. And one of the first things you have to learn when you're acting is to, hey, bring yourself to the circumstances and play the conditions. Don't just jump into some kind of character unless the actual context demands it. But why do we do that? We do that because in our heads, we have an actor voice that we're supposed to sound like. Oh, an actor is perhaps someone who sounds like this. And we might have gotten it from an SNL skit. We might have gotten it from a high school Shakespeare play that we saw. But we all have our version of that. And you have to learn to let go of the actor voice so that you can bring your own authentic voice. And boy, your voice is so much better than the one you think you need to sound like. In a similar way, we kind of have an enlightened response in our heads that we think we always need to have, or we have a concept of what it means to be an enlightened, mature person. And it can be so easy to be disappointed with ourselves in a way that leads to a lot of self-condemnation, which then leads to a sense of apathy that wants to give up, because it's like, oh man, if I were a better person, I would probably feel different than how I feel. If I were a better person, I would probably be more optimistic about this. And there's something to be said about being present with your emotional experiences in a spirit of non-judgmental charity, with the spirit of openness that says, I'm not going to resist what I'm feeling. I'm not going to resent what I'm feeling, because I know that what I'm feeling is not the essence of who I am. What I am feeling is part of my humanity. It's an experience that doesn't make me good or bad to have it. And so I can be with that feeling without judging myself for it. And now that sort of provides a bulwark against the temptation to give up because I feel unworthy of what life is demanding of me at this moment.
When it comes to emotional clutter, and then also bridging in minimalism, I find that, at least in my own experience of going through adversity, it's best just to master the basics and the fundamentals during those times, and not try to cling on to like all these different things, not try to have a million friends, not try to work on a million different things. It's like, all right, master the fundamentals, work out, sleep, eat. It's like monk mode, eat good, focus on my work, focus on the core group of friends that I have that are going to really like lift me up during this time. In your experience, and also combining that with your work and what you're doing with the Minimalists and the podcast and everything, like, what do you think people need to focus on during adversity to keep their mind like as detoxed as possible, so they can be crystal clear on getting out of a messy situation?
I'll use a basketball analogy here. Let's say you're at the end of a basketball game. There's no time on the clock. Your team is down by 1 point. You're fouled, and you have to go to the free throw line, and you've got to do the best that you can to make 2 free throws. Okay, there's a lot of pressure in this moment. There's a lot at stake. If you miss them both, your team loses, and it's pretty clearly going to be on you. In that moment, you've got to go into it knowing that there's nothing you can do to become a better free throw shooter now. You are who you are at this moment, right? In between the games, You can shoot 100 free throws and try to become better, but this is not the moment for that. You've got to bring what you have to the table in this moment and not try to be anything that your discipline hasn't developed you into being. Sometimes when we have adverse circumstances or we experience dramatic moments, we want to respond in a dramatic way and we want to do something that's super heroic. And it's so important to say, well, wait a minute. In these kinds of moments, I need to recognize that this isn't practice. This is game time. During my downtime, I can work on all of my weaknesses and I can try to get better and I can do all the different drills. But right now, I need to simplify, focus on what I know how to do and what I'm comfortable doing, and take one step at a time to just move the needle in a healthy and constructive direction. So this isn't the game for me to try to shoot a free throw with my left hand if I haven't worked on that. And I might feel like, oh, but if I were a good player, I'd be ambidextrous. Or, if I were the player that I wanted to be, I'd be able to shoot this free throw with either hand. That's great. Later on, you're going to work on all that stuff. You're going to pour your heart into it. But today, I want you to shoot free throws in the way that everyone's going to laugh at, because that's how you know how to shoot a free throw. Just focus on what you know how to do. Like you mentioned, getting some sleep, taking that time to take a walk and be alone with yourself, putting on the music that calms you down, and not doing the things based on the standards you have for your ideal self, but based on what works for the person that you are now, without requiring yourself to grow up too fast or be more mature than you actually are. A lot of self-honesty it requires.
I think the problem becomes, at least again in my experience and from some people that I've also talked to, is that when it is game time, you know what you need to do. You know what works, what the blueprint is. Now you got the crowd chirping at you. And sometimes that crowd is you. Like, you got these intrusive thoughts, got these negative thoughts, like, you're not going to get out of this. You're a piece of crap. Like, I can't believe how bad you messed up or whatever. How do we declutter that part where these thoughts are just coming at us left and right, whether it's from people in the crowd or whether it's from our own mind?
There's a anecdote about 3 monks who were sitting in silence meditating, and the devil walks up to them and he says to the monks, he goes, if you guys could go back in the past and change anything, what would it be? And the first monk says, I would go back to the moment when you first tempted human beings to do the wrong thing, and I would stop you from doing that. And the devil goes, oh, that's a pretty good choice. What about you? And he says to the second monk, and the second monk says, I would go back to the moment when there was the first war and you somehow deceived people into fighting against one another, and I'd stop you from doing that. And the devil says, okay, that's a good one. And then he looks at the third monk and he says, what about you? And that third monk turns the other direction away from the devil, and he continues to meditate, and the devil freaks out and he runs away. And the other 2 monks look at the third monk and they say, what did you do to freak him out? And he says, I refuse to talk with him, because the moment you have a conversation with the devil, you've already lost. And I think when you're in those kinds of moments, it's important to not have a conversation with the devil. What is the devil? The devil is that voice that tempts you to think about the challenges other than the ones that are in front of you right now. What do we say in recovery? One day at a time, one step at a time. The moment you start to think about how I'm going to deal with tomorrow's temptations, or the temptations in the next game, or the temptations that are going to come in the fourth quarter, or the challenges that I might have to deal with next month, you are now going beyond the amount of inner resources that you have to deal with the things that are in front of you, because the grace to deal with today's problems exists today. The grace for tomorrow's problems exists tomorrow. You don't have the grace today, the power today, the presence today to deal with tomorrow's problems. And so when you're in that moment, it may seem very subtle, but it's like you hear the crowd and you start to think, oh man, what if at some point in the future I make a mistake and the crowd laughs at me? You're having a conversation with the devil now because you're out of the moment. What is the current moment all about? Walking out on that floor, looking at my teammates and giving them a pound and saying, hey, let's do this. That's it. Finding my position on the floor and saying, all right, this is where I need to be for this moment. Right. And staying in that moment and making that a practice and finding something even that you can look at or that you can listen to that allows you to do it, which is why a lot of public speakers will say when they're up there, they'll find someone in the crowd, maybe someone that's smiling at them or that looks really attentive, and that they'll make that person their focal point, and they'll look around the room, but then they'll always come back to that person. Find something you can look at, you can listen to, you can focus on that anchors you in the present moment. Because when you get out of the present moment and you start thinking about the past, what happened last game, or the future, what might happen, you're having a conversation with the devil and you've already lost. But when you stay focused, that runs away.
I would say one of the other quote unquote devils that can pop up in situations like that when you're trying to be present and the game's on the line, or you're in a situation in life that's challenging, is not letting your feelings take over, right? And the minute we let our feelings take over, we tend to act impulsively, act reactively, and it's the old saying, like, you make a long-term decision based on a short-term emotion, right? How can people, even in your experience, or even in some of the people that you've talked to, how can people get better at harnessing their feelings so that they're not overtaking them throughout the course of their life?
Yeah, I think when you resent your feelings, you resist the wisdom they provide. One of the things that Josh and I talk about in the Emotional Clutter audiobook is psychological choreography. And the premise of psychological choreography is that the different emotional states that we can occupy are kind of comparable to the different genres of music. And when it comes to genres of music, there is no good or bad. There's just some genres are more difficult to dance to than others, right? And so when you're at a wedding and some song like "Tonight's Gonna Be a Good Night" or YMCA, that song's playing, it's so easy to dance to that even your uncle who can't dance is having a good time, because all you really have to do is just kind of move your body in whatever way you want. And look, this works for YMCA, and that's not even a dance, but I'm cool on the dance floor with that, right? But then imagine if you're in the middle of that and the DJ changes that and he starts playing something like polka. It's like, oh, wow, that's kind of weird, and everyone's going to immediately feel a little tense and uncomfortable, and they'll probably leave the dance floor because it's really difficult to know how you should dance to that if you don't have any moves. And there just may be two people on the dance floor, namely people that have learned how to move with the rhythms of polka. And I think our emotional states are like that, where happiness is like a genre of music that everyone knows how to dance to and that you just can't get wrong, which is why whenever we feel like good about something, you get some good news, you never call a friend and you go, "Hey man, things are going really well. I just got a promotion at the job, or I'm having a new baby. Do I do a fist pump? Do I jump up and down? I don't know what to do. Help me with my happiness." Like, you can do whatever you want and it just works. But it's when you're angry, when you're jealous, when you're bitter, when you're scared, when you're sad, that you call your friend and you say, "Man, I don't know how to dance to this. I was on the dance floor moving to YMCA and I felt fine. What I was doing was working, but man, I don't know how to dance to this." And what usually happens through that processing and the conversing, you pick up some moves and you start to get a feel for the rhythm of that feeling. And you realize that, oh, okay, I don't have to be the kind of person who is incapable of feeling jealousy. I just got to learn some moves that are conducive to this kind of energy, because this kind of energy is going to come and go. It's a part of life. And in a similar way, when feelings take over, it's often because we are trying to suppress the feeling. We are fighting against it. We are resisting it because we believe the feeling is bad. The feeling is some kind of demon. And if I'm letting it here, then I'm possessed. And well, if you think you're possessed, you'll probably act like a person that's possessed. However, if you say that feeling is not a demon, it's part of my aliveness, and it's like music, and I feel very awkward and uncomfortable and tense because I just don't know how to dance to this. And that's all right. I can learn some new moves, and I don't have to learn all the moves right now. It just starts with maybe learning a basic 1-2 step that allows me to get started so I can stay on the floor and figure out the rest as I go along.
And I know in the book you give some practical like exercises for people to test out and try so that they can like work on all of this stuff. And like one of the questions I have is, I think it can be hard to work on this stuff because a lot of people don't have separation in their life. They have busy schedules. They got kids. I mean, they got a job or two. They just like life is busy, and not on top of life being busy, there's so many things that are distracting people and overwhelming them to become more emotionally unregulated as the day goes on with stuff. Like if you were in a situation where you were feeling like emotionally kind of unstable, everything seemed to kind of bother you, or you have certain situations that would constantly like kind of trigger a certain reaction that you weren't happy with, do you think that you would want to take some space from like work and everything to like be diligent about working on this stuff? Or do you find it would be more beneficial for you to kind of build these routines within the context of your current life?
It takes discernment. It's an art more than it is a science. Like, you know that there are moments where the best thing to do about a feeling you have is to just work through it, to just keep moving and not stop and give attention to it. And then there are other moments where it's important to just take a break and just go for a walk, take a minute or something like that. And one of the things I'll say about the busy aspect is what we are unable to do because of busyness has as much to do with our expectations and assumptions as it does with our schedule. So think about it in terms of going grocery shopping or ordering carry out on an empty stomach. It's really easy when you're hungry to overestimate how much food you need in order to feel satiated. No one is going to be a worse guesser at what's needed than the person who is really, really hungry, right? And you have a moment in your life where you were like ordering pizza with the friends or something, and you're like, oh, I'm really hungry. I think we're going to need an extra pizza or something. And then you got all this food left over and you can't consume it all. In a similar way, when you're really busy and you're starved for alone time, it can easily feel like, man, unless I get a sabbatical or a week off or 3 hours of alone time or a babysitter, I'm never going to be able to get myself straight. And you would be amazed at what 2 minutes of quiet time can do for you. You know, just being able to negotiate with someone for you to get away for 2 minutes and be able to make a practice out of that. Now, if while you're having that 2 minutes, you're telling yourself a story of, man, this ain't gonna do nothing. Man, this 2 minutes, you know, the Buddha had hours. I'm never going to be the person I need to be if I only got 2 minutes. Well, then it definitely won't work because you're spending your 2 minutes hating on the 2 minutes. But if you can take some time and practice, and maybe your first 2 minute session won't be very productive, it's okay. But if you can master the art of just getting 2 minutes a day where no one's talking to you, you're not processing what someone else is trying to solve, that can become a kind of practice that leads to significant results over time. And so for the busy person, don't overestimate how much time you need to be able to make a practice of alone time. This isn't the sort of thing where you got to have an hour a day to meditate. That's sort of a stereotype.
And I'm a little biased towards the first example I gave because, and I've told people who listen to my podcast know my story, but in this example, it was like I was so bad at regulating my emotions when I was as a teenager and then into my like very early 20s, and with panic attacks and anxiety and stress and depression and suicidal ideation, that I used drugs to suppress all of that for years. And it took the legal system removing me from society for a period of 90 days for a felony drug charge that forced me into a jail cell to learn how to deal with my emotions in a way that wasn't destroying me and also being a menace to society, right? And so I look at me being forced into that situation as the biggest blessing of my life. But I don't think that everybody else has to go through something like that to get to the things that we're talking about. I say that just because I have a slight bias, because if I wasn't going to be the guy that would have listened to you back then, I would have been the guy that's like, well, it's way easier for me to snort a line of oxy than it would be to calm myself down than it would be to meditate for a few minutes. And I think maybe to build off of this, how do you convince somebody who maybe drinks, every night during the week or smokes some weed or whatever to like self-soothe, and maybe they don't see a problem with it. And they're like, oh, like I'm feeling better emotionally, but we all know downstream there's going to be some side effects that come along with that. Like I presume that you're also in recovery based on what you said a few minutes ago. What's the better offer for somebody to put down a numbing substance that maybe isn't destroying their life in the near term, to choose something different like self-introspection or meditation and stuff?
I guess I say two things. One, easier isn't necessarily better. And two, easy is often just another way of saying, this is what I have practiced to the point of it becoming second nature. So let's take the first thing first. Easier isn't necessarily better. Let's say you go on vacation with your family and maybe it's 5 of you. It's time to eat lunch or dinner. 2 kids have allergies. 1 person has dietary restrictions. Another person can eat anything. You and I both know as men, if we're on the road by ourselves and we're going to figure out what we'll eat, that's pretty easy, right? But you add 1, 2, 3, 4 other people that you have to feed, that becomes complicated. It takes some discussion. It takes some planning. You might have to call a couple of restaurants to check on some ingredient stuff. That is harder. But easier isn't necessarily better. I can go off by myself, or I can enjoy time with my family. The things that are enjoyable, the things that are deeply meaningful, are often harder in a way that just require more patience, more intentionality, and more deliberateness. Getting physically fit isn't easier. It's harder, but it's also better, right? The second thing I say is about easy often being a synonym for what I've practiced and what I've become familiar with. If you take something like the 2 minutes a day of meditation or just being alone, that's not a lot of time, but it is really hard if you've never done it before, because that's just what it means for things to be hard. However, if you were to say every day for the next 30 days, I'm going to just take 2 minutes and I'm going to be alone, even if it's not productive. For that first month, you probably won't even see any difference. But guess what happens as you enter into month 2? You become better, even at a subconscious level, of knowing how to make that 2 minutes work for you. And you become better at digging for gold, finding treasures, unearthing good things from your own soul in that 2 minutes of space, because you have actually practiced being present with yourself for 2 minutes. And that starts to get easier and more rewarding. But when it comes to substance abuse, that feels easier because, one, we've done it for so long. We're familiar with it. We know how to get high. We know how to overindulge the fast food. We know how to look to booze or something to medicate our pain. And we're very rehearsed in it, and the rewards are immediate. And we got that euphoric recall to help us indulge. When it comes to the other stuff, if you take time and you build that discipline, it's hard at first, but it gets easier over time, and it has the advantage of being better.
Totally. And I think one of the other things that people have a challenge with when it comes to everything that we're talking about is people in their life that they're spending time with. Because a lot of times all of this kind of clutter that we've been kind of chatting about, and adversity and reasons to want to numb out, is because we have toxic, and I know that word gets thrown around, but just toxic energy in our life. And I think that the toxic energy isn't necessarily the people, it's the yearning for abundance in relationships and friendships. We want to be friends with everybody. We want to make friends with everybody online. We want to have all these people interacting with us because it feels good, right? It's like that, the fake dopamine hit we get from just these kind of surface level interactions. Then on top of that, and I know you guys talk about this too, you have people that you've had in your life for 15 years, 20 years. You went to high school with, you went to college with them. Maybe they were your neighbor, and they're not aligned with where you're going, but you have this weird loyalty to them despite that. And one of the things I often say on the show is that you got to surround yourself with people who have common futures and not common pasts. And I would love to get your take on this. Like, how can people decide who should stay in their life? Like, who are their ride or die? Like, I think it was it you, or was it Josh? Like, who survived the fire with you? Like, how do you find friends like that they're ride or die, no matter what? They're going to be with you through the thick of time.
Well, I think those types of friends in many ways are are not found as much as they are given and co-created. Such friends are both a gift and something that you create together over time. And you often don't know who those friends are until you've survived the fire together. When you think about ride or die friends, it's not because you looked at some guy and was like, that dude looks ride or die. It's because you started off with something superficial, but then you went through some fire and you didn't see it coming. And that guy came through for you in some ways. You know, he stuck by you maybe when others didn't and did some inconvenient things for you. And you said, oh man, I didn't know, but that's a ride or die. And so I think with friendships in general, we have to be careful with treating it like a checklist type of thing where it's like, I'm going to go get me some ride or die friends. And we simply live our lives organically and exercise a discerning eye towards those who are good for us and good to us in this kind of way. But another thing I'd say is something I learned from my dad when it comes to like managing different types of friends. Like, oh, I've got these people I went to high school with. I've got people in my own neighborhood. All or nothing thinking really makes everything very, very difficult. And it's important to be intentional about people's place in our lives and be able to step back and say, hey, I've got many friends, but not every friend is someone that I go to the gym with. Not every friend is someone that I hang out with every Saturday. Not every friend is someone that I talk to on the phone with. Some friends are the kind of people who I know I'm going to be good with if I call them up on their birthday. And some friends are going to be good. I think about my high school drama teacher, who I consider to be a second mom. I call her every Mother's Day. Maybe there's another conversation at some time in the year, but that's usually about it. And the two of us are tight. And whenever we have that conversation, it means everything. And I know I can call her any day of the week, but that's about the rhythm that our friendship has taken, and it's mutual and it's great. I've got a friend, Isaac, where he's probably my best friend, and we'll go 3 months without saying a word to each other. And then we'll go 5 days straight where we're like talking for an hour a day, just like getting into it, you know, talking about crazy stuff, superficial stuff, important stuff. And so not every friendship needs to have the same rhythm. And, you know, in the way that I can say, I love my wife, I love my mom, not in the same way.
In the spirit of like consolidation, like talking about like how, you know, somebody his mind is just cluttered and we're working on trying to help them detox it. Let's just say that, you know, they have a bunch of people in their life already, but they're trying to figure out, like, again, not that there needs to be any kind of ranking system or checklist, but I think discernment does matter as to, okay, like these are the people I'm going to keep in my corner right now, because I know that these other ones, I just have a gut feeling that I don't know if they're going to be the right person to go through this season of life with. Do you have any advice for people that are looking to consolidate, declutter their relationships?
I think if we ask, why is consolidating so hard? Why do you struggle so much to say no? And I think we'd find something there with respect to guilt, misdirected obligation. Well, I gotta be there for them. They need me. Well, I can't say no. They really, really want me to be there. And the problem with that is the legitimacy of a need is not the same thing as evidence that it's possible or healthy for you to be the one to meet that need. You know, if I came to you and I said, Doug, I owe the mafia $1 million, and if I don't have the money by tonight, I'm a dead man. And you say, get out of here, man. That story's crazy. And I just pull out a whole bunch of proof and show you that it's true. Okay, that's a real need. It doesn't change the fact that you may not have $1 million to give me, right? So whatever help you're going to offer me, it's got to be within the context of what's feasible and healthy for you to do. Maybe you can give me some words to say to the mafia. Maybe you can give me a perspective on it, whatever it may be. And oftentimes when we deal with people in relationships, we only think about the legitimacy of their need or their desire or their demand or their expectation. And we don't think about what's feasible and what's healthy for us. And what I would say to the person that struggles with that kind of guilt, I would say, okay, hold on to that guilt for 5 seconds for me. And while you're holding on to it, I want you to think about this. Think about all the people in your life that you're failing to be available for, people that really need you, because you're refusing to say no to anyone. Think about your daughter. Think about your husband. Think about your wife. Think about your best friend, those people that you really enjoy serving, those people that you really feel called to help out, and how much better you can show up for them if you would have the courage to say no to some of these other expectations and demands. And I would think about it in those terms. Saying no isn't really about being mean or being cruel or being insensitive. It's about expanding our capacity to say yes in ways that are actually healthy, so that we're not showing up physically for the people that we really love, but falling asleep on them, being distracted in their presence, not being very helpful because we're undernourished. You've got to respect your ability to be undernourished and be honest with yourself about how useless you can be when you show up for the people that you love as the undernourished version of yourself. And how do you correct that? You got to say no. My buddy Isaac Morehouse puts it this way. He says, decide who you want to be a hero for and ignore everyone else. Not because you're mean, but because you're a finite human being and you're going to do that one way or another. If you say, I won't ignore anybody, okay, that means you're just going to ignore the people that really need you, and you won't even know that you're doing it, which is going to even be more hurtful to them.
And in many cases, we need to be the hero for ourselves. Like, how can somebody kind of continue that, peel that onion back? Because I think in a lot of this, what really matters and what you get at in talking about emotional decluttering is self-awareness, just being aware of everything that's kind of going on and being aware of behaviors and surroundings and how life is. What are some ways that you've embraced this for yourself to become like a better hero for TK, so that the other people that are meaningful to you in your life can see the ripple effects from that?
You know, one of the things that you and I were talking about before this conversation is the limitation of saying, oh, I don't care what other people think. I don't care about, audience reactions, and how if you're going to create something for the world, there has to be a collaboration mindset where it's, hey, I need to think about me, but I also need to think about someone other than me. And I think the same is true when it comes to being healthy and being good for our relationships. You got to think about someone else, but that's not a good starting point, because there are an infinite number of problems and people who need help and will accept it from you. And you can't meet all of those needs. And so the way that you kind of give yourself context for how you should be towards others is you start with yourself. You don't end with yourself, but you start with yourself. And one of the things I try to do, and I try to encourage others to do it, is that when you begin your day, never begin it in reaction mode. Do the best that you can to never start a day by externally directing your attention towards other people's demands, expectations, and requests of you. Because if you do that, you're starting off in the frenzy state, in reaction mode, and you might be helping people, but you're not helping them from a place of being centered, from a place of being grounded. And that compromises both the joy that you're getting out of it and sets you up for resentment and burnout. And it also isn't serving them in the best way, even if they're happy to have you working for them. And so if you can carve out at the start of your day just a little bit of time, going back to those 2 minutes where you say, hey, what do I need today to be my best self? What's important to me? What am I living for? And you don't need good answers on the first day. You just need the practice of sitting with yourself in that way. And I would encourage people to end the day by thinking intentionally about how they're going to start the next day, giving themselves that time and space. And that way, when you go out and engage the world, you can say, all right, I know where I stand today. I know where I'm at. And I may have some things going on that don't even feel great, but that's all right, because I know where I'm at. Just like I know I'm in California right now, I know where I am. I know where I am on the inside right now. I'm not lost. I may not be where I want to be, but I'm not lost. And I can engage you from a place of not being lost. And that's when you can move outward. If you stay there, you're not doing very well either. But you can move outward and begin to engage and serve other people from a place of knowing where you are.
And a lot of this comes back to curiosity. And I think when people think of curiosity at times, they may think of it as like solving some sort of mystery or like learning something brand new or just something that's much bigger than what it actually is. Tell me more about how you view curiosity and how like people can use it in their everyday lives to better understand themselves and how they navigate emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, I see curiosity as being honest with yourself enough to be, or being honest with yourself about what you're interested in, even if it's not popular or profitable. It's being present with what inspires awe. It's being present with and available to things that I find to be fascinating and intriguing, and creating the space for me to inquire about that, or to engage that, or to pursue that. It's realizing that not all of life can come from a place of obligation or necessity, but there is an aspect to who we are as human beings and our creative expression that can only come forth when we're engaging the world with a sense of play. Hey, I'm not doing this because it's necessary. I'm not doing this because I have a belief or a guarantee that it's going to go somewhere. I'm doing this for no other reason than that this is interesting to me. This just seems fun. I'm just intrigued. I just wonder how it's going to end, or where it's going to go, or what it's going to be like. As Seth Godin said, when he was a kid, his father had like this black mechanical box, and they didn't really have any toys. And so him and his brothers would poke the box to see what would happen. And to me, that's what curiosity is. It's the willingness to poke the box, to just see what happens. And you've got to create some space in your life for that, because that curiosity facilitates a kind of growth that's very different than the kind of growth you get from personal development or from seeking out excellence at your job. Many of the most wonderful things that have come into existence in art, in technology, have been the result of people doing things for reasons other than it's going to solve this problem.
How have you used curiosity to better understand your own feelings and thoughts as they come up in a negative way?
When I have feelings, I don't think of them as demons to be exorcised. I don't think of them as enemies that are attacking me, even those feelings that are very unpleasant and very inconvenient. I I think of them metaphorically as angels, and the word angel means messenger, right? There's something here for me, right? It's like if the roof rolled back and you saw an angel descend and he says, Doug, hello, you'd be like, whoa, this is crazy. Now you'd probably be freaked out no matter how beautiful that angel is in theory. Like I'd be freaked out and I'd be scared. But I'd also go, whoa, like, why me? Why did you visit me today? What do you have to teach me? And so the role my curiosity plays is it incentivizes me to engage my feelings as a teacher. If I'm jealous of someone, or if I'm surprisingly saddened by something, or if I find myself being irritable in a way that I didn't think was me, man, that's an opportunity to learn. Like, what's going on there? Why did that make me so angry? Like, all that person did was say one little word, and I didn't even have a problem with that word. I didn't know that I did. Why does that rub me the wrong way? Or why didn't I like it that this person asked me a pretty simple question? Like, why did I feel so bothered by that? And then I can begin to process, and I may discover something about my value system. I may discover something about the way in which my past has shaped the man that I am today, the way that I want to be spoken to, or the way that I need to learn how to listen, the way that I could improve how I'm showing up, or even the way I could improve the demands that I place on others. I can learn something, and I approach it in that way.
In reading your book, like one of the main core themes I got out of it was being able to embrace the dance, being able to ride the wave, being able to toggle between the good times and the bad times and remain even keel. It's a difficult thing to do, right? Especially in a world where it's easy to be sad and it's also easy to get super excited with instant gratification, right? How can people establish equanimity for themselves so that they can get used to kind of riding the wave during times of adversity or even times of triumph, because I think what tends to happen is, and this is my speaking from my own experience as well, as like it's like a 6-foot wave of life comes and it just topples me and I'm like rolling and getting stuck in I got sand in my face, you know what I mean, and like in my hair, and I'm like don't even know where I'm at 'cause I'm upside down in the water. And how do we prevent that?
I think there are at least two distinct but related ways in which we get discouraged. One is we're dealing with something that's actually bad in some kind of way. But two, we're dealing with something that actually isn't bad, but we think it's bad, and therefore we feel bad about it. And we all have experiences in life where maybe we're trying something and we're like, man, I stink at this. And someone comes along and says, actually, man, you're doing better than everybody else. I thought you would be doing worse right now. For someone at your stage who's just starting, you're doing really good. And you go, yeah. And they say, yeah. And then you immediately feel different about it. And that's an example of you're experiencing something that isn't actually bad, but because you have a story about it that says this is bad and I should be doing something better or different, you feel bad about it, which is why so many problems get solved by talking with someone who can just give us a different perspective so that we can reframe it. I remember I was crying to my brother one time when I was a kid because there was this girl that I liked and like she was my girlfriend, right? And there was this other kid who liked her too. And this guy was better looking. And, you know, you could feel it when he would come into the room. It's like, this guy is a threat, man. He's a threat. And I remember it was her birthday and he brought her a little box of chocolates. And right as I'm standing there talking to her, he says, hey, I wanted to give you this for your birthday. And she's like, oh, this is so sweet. Thank you. And I'm just there, man. And I'm just like having a meltdown and I'm so embarrassed and I just feel like I've lost. And so I go home and I'm crying to my older brother and I tell him what happens and he laughs at me and he says, okay, dude, he goes, let's reenact this and I'm going to show you what you need to do next time. And I go, okay. And so he's there pretending like he's talking to my girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And I walk up and I say, hey, I got you this box of chocolates for your birthday. And she goes, oh, that's so sweet. And my brother goes, dude, turtles? I love these. And he opens up the box and grabs a turtle and eats it. And then he slaps me on the butt and he says, hey, thanks, man. You made my day. And I laughed just like you did. And what's great about that story is my brother didn't show me how to get the girl to like me. He didn't show me how to get the other guy to go away. He showed me how to reframe what happened in a way that allowed me to say, hey, it doesn't have to be a threat. If something like that happens, there's a way to engage it that actually makes it funny, even if I never get the girl's eyes cast upon me. And so I once heard, there were two people talking and one was kind of like a guru and the other was a questioner. And the guru was going on and on about everything is divine. Everything is divine. Everything in the universe is a manifestation of the divine. So do not worry and do not do this and don't try to change things because everything is divine. And the questioner goes, if everything is divine, then what about my impulse to change the way things are? Is that too not divine? And the guru says, yes, you have a point. And I would say that when we have these emotional experiences where we feel unsettled and we're just greeted with a tidal wave of unwanted emotional energy, that too is divine. That too is part of the beauty of being human. That too is part of the beauty of being alive. And it's one of those things that isn't bad, although it feels uncomfortable, but we can experience it as bad if we tell ourselves a story that I am a bad person, I am a loser, I am doing something wrong, I am unworthy, life is against me because I'm having this experience. But when we let go of that story and we say, hey, this feels uncomfortable, just like waking up when my alarm goes off. This is unpleasant, just like it is when I have to prepare food when I'm really, really hungry and just want to eat right now. but it's not bad. This is part of life. This is my reminder that I'm here and that I'm real and I can learn something from it. And it's going to deepen my ability to connect with people in the future. And then you feel a little better. It's like Bobby McFerrin says, in every life we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry. Just don't double it. Just don't double it. As long as it's a single shot, you can handle it. You can drink it up.
I wish I had your older brother during my days in school, because there was a time where I went to go ask like one of the prettiest girls in my class to prom, and I had like gotten some flowers and I was going to give them to her. And outside of my school, like everybody like gathered there because they were either waiting for the bus, waiting to get picked up, or it was just like that's where people just hung out before they actually left school. And I went to walk up to her to give her the flowers, and she took them and ran. And I'm in front of like all these kids, and I'm like so embarrassed, mortified, crushed on every level. And I just was like so emotional when I got home. And I just remember going home and just crying for like hours and hours and hours, because I just felt like just so disrespected and just hurt and everything else. Right. But now I'm able to look at that in a much different way than I did back then, you know, because there's also like the reframes of like, oh, it's not about you, it's about them. But a lot of times as kids, we don't want to hear that reframe. You know what I mean? Because we're just like, well, I wanted just to feel good in that moment. So I just bring that up because I can kind of relate on a different level. I mean, it was so embarrassing. I guess to follow up, you know, we talked at the beginning about your big moment of adversity for you that really has happened in the last few years, being hit by an SUV. Anything come up for you recently where you've had this aha reframe moment where you were looking at a situation you were in some sort of negative context, but either a friend of yours or even yourself helped you change your perspective on it to kind of see some silver lining there?
About 4 months ago, I had a 6-week time span where I went to the hospital for the same thing on 2 separate occasions. And I'm talking about like 5 days in the hospital. It started with me just having this like crazy amount of stomach pain. I couldn't hold down any food, and it was getting really bad. And I went to the emergency room, and it turns out that I had an intestinal obstruction. So about 12 years ago, I had a hernia surgery. And anytime you have a surgery, you know, scar tissue forms as part of the healing process. And when you have something like that in your abdomen area, those scar tissues can create a potential source of obstruction for things like your small intestines. Things can get sort of tangled, knotted up, and food can't pass through. And basically your stomach becomes a ticking time bomb if you can't get that fixed. And so surgery is one way to fix it, but each time you get a surgery, you get more scar tissues, and the probability of that happening again go up. And so when I went to the hospital, they put an NG tube up my nose, stuck it down my throat, and they pumped everything out, and they're putting the IV in me. And the hope was it could self-correct once my stomach is kind of emptied out. And it did. And I got lucky. And that was such a painful, rough experience. I was like, I never want to go back in the hospital again like this. And then 2 weeks later, same thing happened. I'm back in the hospital. And when I got there this time, I wasn't just in physical pain. I was just like emotionally devastated. I just felt like, man. So after all of that, I sit down with my doctor. She says to me all the different aspects of this that are random and that I can't control. But she says, I'm going to tell you what you can control. And if you control this, she goes, you got a really high chance of not being able to come back to the hospital again. And it was all about my diet. And she told me exactly how I needed to eat. And I'm like, oh, right. And because that's my thing. That's my temptation. That's my vice, to overindulge on fast food as my form of medication. So I'm taking a walk with Josh, and I'm talking to him about it. And I told him, like, I have food sadness. I was sitting there eating my food, and I just looked at what I had, and I wanted to cry. Because I was just like, my meal looks sad. My meal feels sad. And I was embarrassed that I felt this way. And Doug, I wish that I didn't have to tell this because, they'll light me up in YouTube for even having that emotional experience, right? Like, doesn't that make me entitled or immature or something is wrong with me that I'm sitting here and because I couldn't have McDonald's, I felt like crying? And that's how I felt, man. And I'm talking with Josh and he says, you know what's interesting about this is the way you need to eat is exactly how you've been talking to me for the past few months before you even had this condition about how you want to eat. It's literally with no distinctions exactly how you've been wanting to eat. It looks like you were given a gift. It looks like the universe just did something to you. It was like, all right, man, you've been telling me what you want to do for the past few months. I hate to do this to you, brother, but I got to send you to the hospital and take you through this so that you can realize that this is what you want to do. At a certain level, metaphorically speaking, there's kind of like this thing where I did this to myself through the doctor. It's like in a movie where one guy ruins his best friend's life and he apologizes to him. And his friend says, you didn't do this to me. I did this to me. I drew you into my experience so that through you, I could exercise my demons. And it's like, man, that's a reframe. At a certain level, I drew this into my experience so that through this experience, I could exercise my demons and actually become the man that I've always wanted to be. I didn't need that, but I also needed that. That was my permission slip.
It's beautifully said, man. I'm curious, like being as self-aware and growth-minded as you are, like why do you think you didn't make that change, even though you knew you wanted to and needed to before that experience?
I guess I could say, and this is what I've learned to say, that the pain of changing was greater than the pain of remaining the same, as the old cliche goes.
But what were you afraid of? Was it because the fast food was a coping mechanism for you emotionally that you just couldn't give up?
I think so. It was cheap dopamine. It was easy adventure. And the funny thing about this, I have the same brother who gave me the reframe about the girl. He says, if you take something like the 10 Commandments, for instance, he says, we're all naturally good at maybe one or two of those. And we're all like really bad at another one or two. But because we only think about the one or two 10 Commandments or 7 deadly sins that we don't have or that we're good at, we feel really righteous. And the only ones that we count are the ones that other people have, right? So like maybe gluttony isn't my thing, and I just don't have that temptation. So maybe for me it's gambling. I don't identify at all with the experience of ever being tempted to gamble. Never struggle with it. Just not even my thing. So it's very easy for me to feel righteous about that. But the ways in which we are wounded manifest in different ways for each person. And so we all have wounds that need to be healed. We all have ways in which we are seeking wholeness. And when we are too afraid or too mistrusting of love to face what we need to face, we outsource that work in the form of some coping mechanism that gives us cheap dopamine. For some people, it's scrolling. That's not my struggle. But I can't be righteous about the fact that I don't struggle with scrolling, that I don't experience TikTok as a temptation, because I know what the McDonald's drive-thru has done to me. You know what I mean? That's mine. My mom would always say growing up, she would go, hey, the devil's never going to show up to your doorstep with a red suit on and a pitchfork. Never. And he may not even show up in the form of what Hollywood tells you, the beautiful woman in a blue dress. He's going to show up in whatever form is attractive to you. And that's going to be different for each person. So for me, he shows up with a cheeseburger on his head.
Was it you or was it Josh who said that scrolling is the new smoking?
That was Josh. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on all that? Because I kind of agree to a certain extent.
I mean, it clearly is having a growing effect on a lot of people, especially people that are kind of raised by social media. And I forget who it was. It may have been Zuckerberg or someone who worked for Facebook that said that the greatest minds of our time are doing the best that they can to figure out how to keep us on social media for as long as they possibly can keep us. And, you go into a casino, you don't have windows, you don't see clocks, you get free drinks because the people who create these spaces, they're thinking about how do I keep you in here? And that is times 10 on social media. It's not just because people are choosing to scroll. It's because they are really good at figuring out what compels us, what gets our attention. And we are becoming digital addicts. And what's powerful about this form of digital addiction is that, number one, it's going to be a long time, I think, before it's ever classified as an addiction in a way that allows us to talk about it scientifically. But two, it's socially acceptable. Addictions that are not socially acceptable have a lot of external reinforcement, external negative reinforcement, where people say, hey, man, you need to chill. But who's going to get an intervention over saying, oh, my, where has the time gone? I spent 30 minutes scrolling on TikTok when I could have been reading a book, when I could have been walking outside and getting some sunlight, because the person that would do that intervention, they've been doing it for 2 hours and they don't even know that there's anything wrong. In fact, they might be deeply offended by you if you even suggested that something might be wrong with that. But we're getting less sunlight. We're going outside less. We're getting less competent at interacting with people locally and knowing how to do that. And everything is through a non-thing. Everything is through this digital interface. And we're getting away from, what I would call a sacramental approach to reality, where we're experiencing the beauty of engaging physical reality, real things and real people. And so I agree with Josh. I believe it's the new smoking. I don't think we fix the problem by making fun of people or condemning them and getting self-righteous about it. But I think the problem is real.
Totally agree. TK, this has been awesome. Phenomenal conversation. I think the audience is going to get a ton of value out of everything that you just shared and that we just talked about. If people want to connect with you personally, if they want to check out the podcast, if they want to get a copy of your book, where's the best place to do all that?
Just go to theminimalist.com and everything is there. And if you want to reach out and say hello, just tk@theminimalist.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast. Again, the audience is going to get a lot of value out of this. So thanks again for your time.
Hey, I hope so. And thanks for having me on, man. It's been fun talking to you.
Likewise, man.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.